The young woman ran through the dark toward the one light on the whole black flat of the desert, and behind her, closing, came the sound of horses, and she knew that if the door under that light did not open, she was going to die in the next few minutes. It was a spring night in 1883, in the Sulphur Springs Valley of the Arizona Territory, dry and cold under a hard white spill of stars. The woman running was Apache, of the Chiricahua people, and she was 19 years old, and her feet were cut to ribbons because she had run out of a place 11 miles back with no time to find her moccasins. Her name, in her own language, meant something close to morning bird, and the men chasing her did not know it and did not care, because to them, she was not a person with a name. She was property that had gotten loose. The light was a lamp in the window of a ranch house, small and yellow and impossibly far, and she ran for it the way you run for the last thing in the world. She could hear the riders spreading out behind her in the dark, 4 of them, maybe 5, calling to each other, unhurried now because they could see she had nowhere left to go, the desert flat and open, and the only cover that single lit house a quarter-mile ahead. She reached the door with the horses 40 yards behind her, and she did not knock. She struck it with both fists, once, twice, a sound like a drum in the night, and she called out in the broken English she had been beaten into learning, "Please, please, they kill me, please." For one terrible moment nothing happened, and Morning Bird pressed her back against the rough door and turned to face the riders coming out of the dark, and she made up her mind, the way her people had taught her, that whatever happened next, she would meet it standing and looking at it. Then the door opened behind her, and a big hand closed on her arm and pulled her inside, and a tall man in his shirt sleeves stepped into the doorway with a lamp in one hand and a long rifle in the other, and looked out at the riders, raining up hard in his yard, and said, in a voice as flat and cold as the desert night, "That's far enough." The rancher's name was Ben Hollis, and the reason the riders stopped cold was not only the rifle, though the rifle mattered. It was that they knew him, and they knew that of all the doors on that flat, they had run their quarry to the worst one for their purposes. Ben Hollis was 46, a widower, a cattleman who had held that valley ranch for 20 years, since before most of the men in his yard had come to the territory. He had buried a wife and a daughter to the fever a decade back, and had run the place alone since. He was known up and down the Sulphur Springs country for 2 things. The first was that he dealt square with everyone, white or Mexican or Apache, and had traded honestly with the Chiricahua for years, back before the wars pushed most of them onto the reservation, and had learned enough of their tongue to be trusted by people who trusted almost no white man. The second was that he was not a man you crowded. He had faced down rustlers and range bullies for 2 decades, and buried a few who had not taken the warning, and every man in his yard that night knew the stories, so they stopped. 5 riders, hard men, and at the front of them a man named Rance Doyle, who ran a spread of sorts to the south, and a business on the side that decent people did not name out loud. "Evening, Hollis," Doyle said, working to sound easy. "Didn't mean to trouble you. That girl that just ran into your house, she's mine. Ran off from my place tonight. I've come to collect her, that's all. Send her out, and we'll be gone, and no hard feelings. Yours," Ben Hollis said. He did not lower the rifle. "A person can't be yours, Doyle. That's been the law of this country for near 20 years now. So you'll want to try that again, and this time you'll tell me what you actually mean, standing in my yard at midnight with 4 men and running down a barefoot girl through the dark." Rance Doyle was a man who traded in people, and everyone in that country half knew it and mostly looked away, which is how such men survive. The full truth came out later, some from Morning Bird herself, once she had the English and the safety to tell it, some from the reckoning that came after. Doyle held a handful of Apache and Mexican people at his place under a thing he called debt, and the law called nothing good. He would take in the orphaned, the separated, the ones cut loose by the wars and the reservation upheavals, the ones with no band and no papers and nowhere to be, and he would put them to labor and call it working off a debt that never shrank no matter how they worked. Peonage, The law named it when it named it at all, and it was illegal, and it flourished anyway in the dark corners of the territory because the people it fed on were exactly the people no court would trouble itself over. Morning Bird had come to Doyle's place 2 years before, at 17, after a cavalry action scattered her family's small camp, and she had been picked up wandering, half-starved, by a man who sold her to Doyle for the price of a good saddle. She had labored for him 2 years, cooking and hauling and worse, and had planned her running for most of that time, patient the way her people were patient, waiting for the one night the dogs were quiet and the moon was down. Tonight had been the night. She had made 11 miles barefoot before they missed her and rode her down, and she had run the last of it toward the only light on the flat, and the light had turned out, by the grace of whatever power arranges such things, to be the one house in the valley where Doyle's word meant nothing. "She owes me," Doyle said in the yard. 2 years of debt. She's bound to me till it's paid. That's the arrangement, legal as you like, and you've got no call to come between a man and what's owed him. "Show me the paper," Ben Hollis said. "Show me the debt, signed by her, before a clerk, like an honest debt." "You can't, because there isn't one, because what you've got at your place isn't debt, it's slavery, and slavery's been dead in this country since the war, and you know it, which is why you run your collecting at midnight instead of through a sheriff. Get off my land, Doyle." The girl stays. "And come morning, you and I are going to have a reckoning about what you've been keeping down at that spread of yours." For a long moment the yard hung on the edge of blood, 5 men and 1, and it was Ben Hollis's stillness that held it there, and finally turned it. Doyle's men shifted in their saddles. They had come for a barefoot girl, an easy night's work, and they had found instead a man in a doorway with a rifle and a reputation and, they slowly realized, the moral high ground, which even hard men feel the weight of. A couple of them had not known, until Hollis said the word slavery out loud into the cold air, exactly what it was they had been enforcing. Said plainly in a lit yard, with a wronged girl bleeding behind the rancher's legs, the thing looked uglier than it had looked back at Doyle's place where nobody named it. "There's 5 of us, Hollis," Doyle said, but there was less iron in it now. "There is," Ben agreed, "and the first ball out of this rifle goes through you, Doyle, before any of your men clears leather, and every man here knows I can do it, because every man here has heard how the last fellow that crowded me ended up. So the arithmetic is simple. You might take this house, but you won't be alive to enjoy it, and your men know that the second you go down, there's no more wages in it for them, and they'll scatter like quail. You're not paying them enough to die for a girl who cost you a saddle, are you?" He let it sit. "Now, ride off, sleep on it, and understand that this is finished, because come sunup, I'm riding to Tucson, to the United States Marshal, not the county man you've got in your pocket, the federal man, and I'm going to tell him exactly what you keep at your spread and how you keep it. You've got till I do to be gone from this territory. That's more warning than you deserve, and it's the only kind you'll get from me." Rance Doyle sat his horse a moment longer, hate working in his face, doing the arithmetic Hollis had laid out, and finding no answer in it, that ended with him alive and ahead. Then he wheeled his horse. "This ain't done, Hollis," he said. "It is," said Ben Hollis. "You just haven't caught up to it yet." And he stood in the lit doorway with the rifle until the last hoofbeat had died away into the dark, and only then did he step back inside and bar the door. Ben Hollis turned from the barred door to find the young woman standing pressed into the corner of his front room, watching him with the eyes of something that has learned every kindness is a trap, and he understood that the danger in the yard had been the easy part. She was hurt. Her feet were a horror of cuts and thorns, and she was gaunt under it all, and she had positioned herself in the corner with a clear line to the back door, ready to run again the instant this new man showed himself to be the same as the last. Ben had seen that exact posture on a cornered wildcat, and on a beaten dog, and, once, on a soldier back from a bad war, and he knew there was only one way to handle it, which was slow and low and asking nothing. He set the rifle in the rack, deliberately, where she could see him give up the nearest weapon. He crouched by the fire, making himself small, and he did not look straight at her, and he spoke, to her surprise, in a few halting words of her own Chiricahua language, learned in the trading years, rusty and badly accented, but unmistakably meant. "You are safe here," he said in her tongue, the words clumsy. "No one takes you. Sit, eat, rest." Then, in English, gentler, "I'm no good at your language. I'm sorry. I've lost most of it. But I wanted you to hear a word of it, so you'd know I see you're a person, and not whatever that man called you. My name's Ben. This is my house. You can have the fire and the food and the far room with a bar on the door, and I'll sleep out here by the front, between you and anything that comes. Nobody touches you. Not him, not his men, not me. You have my word. For whatever a stranger's word is worth to you tonight, which I know is not much." The young woman stared at him a long time. That he had spoken even a few broken words of her language had done something no amount of English could have. Slowly, watching him the whole way, she lowered herself onto the hearth, close to the warmth she had been 11 cold miles without, and she said, in her careful broken English, "Morning bird. My name, not girl, not his. Morning bird." "Morning bird," Ben repeated, careful to say it right. "That's a fine name. You're welcome here, morning bird. Now let me see to those feet before they turn bad. I'll not touch you more than the doctoring needs, and you tell me to stop, I stop." Ben Hollis rode to Tucson 3 days later. Once Morning Bird's feet were seen to, and she was strong enough that he could leave her safe with his old Mexican housekeeper, and he did exactly what he had promised Doyle he would do, which was a rarer thing than it should have been. He went to the federal marshal, not the Bott County sheriff, and he laid it all out. Peonage was a federal crime, forbidden by an act of Congress passed after the war precisely to kill the practice of debt slavery in the territories, and Ben Hollis knew it, because Ben Hollis was a man who read the law he lived under. He told the marshal what Doyle kept and how he kept it. He gave names, the ones Morning Bird had given him, of others still held at Doyle's spread, and he did the thing that made the difference, the thing men like Doyle counted on no one ever doing. He put his own good name and his own standing behind the word of an Apache woman that no court would otherwise have listened to. "I've traded in this territory 20 years, Ben told the marshal. "You know my name, and you know it's good. I'm telling you what that man runs, and I'm telling you the woman who ran to my door is a truthful witness, and I'll swear to all of it in any court you like. There's people still down there being held right now, tonight. You've got the law to stop it. The only question is whether anybody with the standing to be believed would ever bother to speak for them. Well, I'm bothering. What are you going to do about it?" The marshal, a straight man in a territory that did not have too many, looked at Ben Hollis's hard, honest face and decided to do his job. While Ben was in Tucson, and the weeks after, Morning Bird did something Doyle had never once let her do in 2 years. She made her own choices, and she found she was good at it. She could have gone. Ben made that plain the moment she was strong enough to understand it. He offered to take her to the reservation to search for any of her people who had survived, or to the mission if she wanted the church's protection, or to give her a horse and supplies and let her ride where she would. A free woman answering to no one. He pressed none of it. He simply laid the choices out, the way a decent man lays out choices for a person who has had none, and let her take her time. She took her time. She healed. She watched Ben Hollis run his place, and watched how he was with his hands and his stock and his old housekeeper, and she saw a man who was hard as the country, but fair all the way through. A man who had spoken her language to a stranger in the dark, to spare her one more moment of fear. And she began, cautiously, to make herself part of the place, not because she was told to, but because she chose to. She turned out to know horses better than any man on the ranch, gentling a colt Ben had near given up on. She knew the desert plants, which healed and which killed and which fed, and the old housekeeper began deferring to her in the kitchen and the sick room both. There was a day that settled her place on the ranch past any question. A young hand was bitten by a rattlesnake out on the mesa, brought in gray and swelling and past what the old housekeeper's remedies could touch. Morning Bird took over without asking leave. She cut and drew the wound the way her people knew, and packed it with a poultice she made from plants she sent a boy to gather, by her exact description, and she sat by the young man through a night and a day, changing the poultice, forcing water, watching the swelling with a healer's patient eye. The hand lived and kept his arm, and when he was on his feet again, he came and stood before Morning Bird, and did not know the words in her language, and so simply took off his hat, the way Ben had taught the whole outfit that a man does before a person he owes. The other hands, who had been uneasy around the Apache woman the way men are uneasy around what they have been taught to fear, stopped being uneasy after that. You cannot go on fearing the woman who pulled your friend back from a snake-bite death. Ben watched it happen and thought, that is a standing no roof of mine could give her. She earned it with her own 2 hands, in her own way, out of her own knowledge, and it is the more solid for it. There is a thing Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce said, a few years before all this, standing in front of the powerful men of Washington, that I think of whenever I tell Morning Bird's part of the story. Treat all men alike, Joseph said. Give them all the same law. Give them all an even chance to live and grow. That was the whole of what Morning Bird had never had, an even chance, and it was the whole of what Ben Hollis had handed her without making a speech about it. Given the even chance at last, Morning Bird did not wilt and did not flee. She grew. The federal marshal rode down on Doyle's spread with a posse and a warrant, and what he found there ended Rance Doyle, and it happened because one rancher had been willing to speak. They found 7 people held at Doyle's place, under his invented debts, Apache and Mexican, worked and unpaid and unfree, and the marshal set every one of them at liberty and arrested Doyle and 2 of his men on federal charges. Doyle bawled about debts and arrangements and his rights, the same words he had used in Ben Hollis's yard, and they meant exactly as much to the federal court as they had meant to Ben, which was nothing. Peonage was a crime, and Doyle had built his whole living on it, and the walls came down all at once, the way they do when someone with standing finally pushes. Ben Hollis testified. Morning Bird testified too, in her careful English, steady and clear, and the court, because a respected white rancher had vouched for her and sat beside her, actually listened, which was its own small revolution in that time and place. Doyle went to the federal prison. His spread was sold. The people he had held scattered to freedom, some to the reservation, some to the missions, some to wage work at last, and a couple, having nowhere else, took Ben Hollis up on an offer of honest paid work at his ranch, where they were, for the first time in years, paid. It was not a clean and total justice. The country was too rough and too unfair for that. But it was real, and it was more than anyone had thought possible, and it happened for one reason above all others. A man who did not have to get involved had opened his door in the dark and then refused to let the matter drop once the immediate danger had passed. Most men would have sheltered the girl for a night and been glad to see the back of the trouble. Ben Hollis rode to Tucson. Ben Hollis and Morning Bird were married in the autumn of that year, and by then it was not a rescue and not a refuge, but a true choosing on both sides, which is the only kind of marriage worth the name. He asked her the right way, through the old housekeeper at first because his Chiricahua was too poor for a thing so important, and then plainly in English, once he was sure Morning Bird understood every piece of it. They were on the porch, watching the light go down red over the flat where she had once run for her life. Morning Bird, Ben said, I want to be clear, because you have had too many men decide things about you. I did not shelter you to keep you. You are free. You can ride off tomorrow, and I will grieve it, but I will not stop you, and you will always have that freedom in this house, married or not. So hear me ask, not tell. I have come to love you, not as a thing I saved, as the woman who gentled a colt I'd given up on and stood in a federal court with her chin up and made the whole room believe her. You are the strongest person I have known since I buried my wife, and my house has been dark 10 years, and you have put a light back in it. I would be honored past speaking if you would marry me, of your own free choosing, and if you would not, you have a home here regardless, all your life. That never changes. Morning Bird was quiet. watching the red flat where the worst and then the best night of her life had happened. Then she said, in her careful growing English, "In 2 years with that man, I was a thing. I ran to your door to die a person, and not a thing. You opened it, and then you did the harder thing. You did not keep me, as he kept me. You set me free, and asked nothing, and let me grow, and spoke my own words to me in the dark so I would know I was seen." She turned to him. "I have chosen many small things in this house, Ben Hollis, and found I am good at choosing. Now I choose a large one. I choose you. Not because you saved me, because you are the one man who, having the chance to own me, chose instead to free me. That is the man I will marry. I will tell you how it went for them, because you have come the whole way, and it is a better end than that country usually gave to a story that began the way this one did. They were married by a mission priest, and it raised eyebrows and worse in some quarters. A white rancher wedding an Apache woman in 1883, and Ben Hollis met the eyebrows and the worse with the same flat, cold stare he had given Doyle in his yard, and the talk, finding no purchase, mostly died. Those who knew them came to respect Morning Bird as fiercely as they respected Ben, because she was, plainly, his equal in every way that the country counted, tougher than the land, and smarter than most of the men who doubted her. They ran the ranch together for 22 years. She made it, in time, one of the finest horse operations in the Southern Territory, because her gift with the animals turned out to be worth more than all Ben's cattle. And buyers came from as far as California for stock that Morning Bird Hollis had gentled. The freedmen who had taken Ben's offer stayed on and grew old there, paid and free. And the house that had gone dark for 10 years after Ben buried his first family filled up again, with work and with children, 2 of them, raised to speak both their mother's tongue and their father's, and raised on the story of the night their mother ran barefoot across the flat toward the one light that would open its door. When Morning Bird was an old woman, long after Ben was gone, a young schoolteacher came to write down the recollections of the valley's early people, and asked her, having heard pieces of it, whether it was true she had once been a captive who ran to a rancher's door. Morning Bird corrected the shape of it, gently, because she wanted it remembered right. "I ran to a door," she said. "That is true, but hear the whole of it. Any man might have opened a door for one night and been glad to see the trouble right away. My husband opened the door, and then he rode to Tucson, and then he set free 7 other people who could do nothing for him in return. And then, when he could have kept me as that other man kept me, he set me free instead and waited for me to choose. That is not a story about a girl who was saved. It is a story about a man who used every bit of power he had to give it away. Those are not the same, and you write down the second one, because the world has plenty of the first and far too few of the second. Here is what stays with me. Cruelty in that country was organized and confident and everywhere, and it ran its business at midnight, counting on no one to interfere. It took one man, under no obligation, deciding that the trouble at his door was his business after all, to bring the whole rotten arrangement down. Ben Hollis opened a door. That was all. But he opened it the whole way, and kept it open. And a door held open all the way, it turns out, can let in more light than one man ever expects. If this one moved you, stay a while by the fire. There are more of them coming, more people who ran through the dark toward one small light, and every last one is worth the time it takes to tell.